All right. Well, thank you all for coming. This presentation is going to be about the conversation between Drupal and Backdrop CMS, and in particular, one aspect of that conversation, which is the gin theme. So I can't go further without giving enormous thanks and gratitude to Sascha Eggenburger, who created the gin theme for Drupal. And he's a staff product designer at GitLab and has been very supportive about bringing it to Backdrop, and has done some of the porting work himself, and is officially a maintaining Backdrop as well as in Drupal. So big round of applause for him. I really appreciate his energy and his commitment to the open source model. My name is Laren Kropbaker, and I'm a senior Backdrop developer with Atten Design Group. And Atten Design Group is an agency that does work for nonprofits, higher ed, some government stuff. The tag strategy, design, and development for the mission-driven kind of gives you a sense of where our niche is. And one of the, if not one of the first agencies to recognize the market case for Backdrop from an agency perspective. So in terms of that causation that I referenced, Backdrop CMS famously forked from Drupal after Drupal version 7. And I would say there's still an ongoing informal conversation between the projects, mostly in one direction, if we're fair. Many of the developers that I know that do use Backdrop also have projects that involve Drupal, so have a foot in both worlds, and are tuned into the conversation happening in both worlds as well, and act as kind of a connector in that way. So in terms of that conversation, like I said, I would definitely agree that, or say that most of the conversation comes from the Drupal side to the Backdrop world, just because of the scale of the communities. And Backdrop obviously inherited a lot directly from Drupal and can learn from cross-pollination with the Drupal project. Most of the big modules are already over and available in Backdrop, but modules are still continually being ported from Drupal 7 versions to Backdrop, and occasionally from, as we'll discuss, modules or themes that are for more modern versions of Drupal to Backdrop. Because the concepts between Drupal and Backdrop are so similar, we have, both projects have, views, taxonomy, content types, fields, all these types of things are on a user level the same, even though the code underneath has changed. Many of the discussions that happen in the world are directly relevant to Backdrop, and many of the user tests that have been done relate directly to what Back has inherited as coming from Drupal. So obviously the same decisions are not always reached between the projects, and sometimes the same gets a different answer in one project versus the other. So over time, the conversation may get more and more divergent. But I also do think, even though it's maybe less high volume, some of the conversation does go from back to Drupal as well. Issues that are solved in Backdrop can often be helpful in Drupal 7 or Drupal 7 versions of modules that may be used in Backdrop. Although many of the Drupal 7 modules are no longer being actively maintained, even posting in issue queues can help people, patch their own modules if needed. The integration between the security team allows some conversation that includes the official Drupal security team, as well as the new informal Drupal 7 security group for modules that are becoming unsupported in Drupal, for Drupal 7 versions of the modules. And I pulled out a couple quotes that I appreciate. I know that obviously Dries, the founder of Drupal, prefers modern versions of Drupal, but there have been a couple of quotes that I plucked out from Q&As that he's done that I found helpful in terms of this conversation. This is Dries speaking about Backdrop at a Q&A in 2022, them being Backdrop. We embrace them. They provide a very valuable service. A lot of people have got value from them as part of the family, and I'm all for keeping people in the family. And then from the Pittsburgh Dries note, he says, I would call Backdrop a friendly fork of Drupal 7. In many ways, that has been good for Drupal in the sense that, one, it provided a home for certain users of Drupal, but two, we also learned from that, and we actually took or adopted some of the policies that they started with and applied them to future versions of Drupal. I would say Backdrop has been a net positive for the Drupal project. I think we can promote that as one of the options for people that are stuck with Drupal 7. So I think that those comments are helpful. So it is in some ways an ongoing conversation, as I said, and the focus is the Gin theme. So I'm framing this as bringing Gin to Backdrop as part of this conversation. So in this session, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of what the Gin is and what the corresponding Tonic module in Backdrop provides or will provide. Mention some notable differences in the end user experience between the Backdrop and the Drupal versions, and then take a quick but deeper dive into what it took to get a project built for modern Drupal to run on Backdrop. Most of the modules and things that are coming over to Backdrop are coming from the Drupal 7. It's kind of an interesting exploration to see what it takes to get something that's built for modern Drupal to run with Backdrop. First of all, if any of you are unfamiliar, Gin is a modern administrative theme for Drupal, created again by Sascha Eggenburger. And some of what I love about it is that, well, for one, it's beautiful, but for two, it places a high focus on accessibility and configurability. So you know, if you need sharper contrast, there's a setting for that. If you want your tables to be spaced out a little further, there's a setting for that, or tightened up, you know, there's a setting for that. You can choose your accent color. You can choose light mode or dark mode. There's all these configurations that you can select from that will help build the interface to your specifications and with accessibility in mind. Tonic is a Backdrop module that is in development. There's no official release for it yet, but what I'm going to do is kind of provide the Drupal modules, Gin toolbar, Gin login, things like that do, in that they provide a more unified administrative experience so that the toolbar doesn't look different on the front end as it does when you're on the administrative back end, things like that. And so that one is in development now, but will include a number of those options, and many of them will be configurable as well. So if you want to activate them for the front end, then you may. Screenshots come from the Drupal project page. Kind of give you a quick overview of what the edit screen looks like in Drupal. You can see the sidebar on the right, the edit sidebar on the right. You can see light mode, dark mode. You can see the action buttons up at the top for this edit page. And this page is the Gin settings page on a Backdrop site. So if you're familiar with Gin for Drupal, probably looks quite similar. Many of the settings here are one-to-one. Between the Backdrop and the Drupal version. There are a few notable differences that I'll talk about now. So on the Drupal version, there's a setting that's not present in the Backdrop version for the navigation style that you'll be using. And you have the default sidebar navigation, horizontal modern toolbar, a legacy Drupal classic toolbar, and then a new Drupal navigation, and I believe that there's even another one coming yet, a fifth one. So most of those are not functionality that is provided by Gin, but it's styled by Gin. It's my understanding of that. And since not all of those toolbars are available in Backdrop, I haven't put them, I haven't done the work of creating these. So there's no customizable option yet available in Backdrop. It provides what's basically an equivalent to the horizontal menu, horizontal modern toolbar option, which you can see in this little screenshot at the bottom. And that responds to light mode and dark mode and so on. There's a module for Backdrop called Navbar, which provides the legacy classic Drupal toolbar style. And although it's not identical to the sidebar vertical toolbar, it also does vertical option. So if those are your preference, you can do that with an additional module in Backdrop. I may end up adding support for vertical implementation, but I don't envision providing all of that slate of options, and stumbled across this in the other day in comments that Sascha Eggenburger made, saying that even he's starting to think we're getting to the limit of what's sustainable or supportable in the Drupal there. Another difference between the settings is the secondary toolbar option that is provided in the Drupal version. And this is not available in Backdrop, mostly because much of what's included in the secondary toolbar area is included in the primary toolbar area in Backdrop off to the right, and it has, you know, functionality that get on smaller screens quite nicely. And I decided there are certain things that, you know, you could be considered quote unquote the Backdrop way, that there's no reason to necessarily retrofit it to be exactly the same, and I just left that as is. So I haven't implemented anything special about the secondary test. Gin for Drupal allows users to individually override the gin settings. So if you have one user that prefers light mode and another user that prefers dark mode, they can change the settings that only applies to their specific user. And I do plan to implement this, but I believe it's hard to do that, make that happen in a theme in Backdrop. So it's going to become available through the companion Tonic module that I talked about. But it will be available. And there's an additional setting on the Backdrop version that is not present in the Drupal version, which is toggling on or off the sidebar panel. That's just a default in Drupal, and my implementation is somewhat different. So as I was kind of experimenting with that, I thought it would be better to give people the option to turn that on or off. And, you know, some people may prefer to have those, what shows up in the sidebar appear underneath anyway. So I'd kind of long-term may just leave this setting as an option. In terms of bringing Gin to Backdrop, you may ask, why do it? And primarily it was an experiment just to see how easily, you know, I was curious, taking something from modern Drupal, I was curious how easy it would be to get something, you know, somewhat workable in Backdrop. And so I began it as an experiment. And then I mentioned that, I think it was on Twitter at the time, to Sascha Eggenburger, and he was very encouraging, and that gave me the push I needed, I guess, to actually formally take this on as a project. You know, Backdrop has done a lot of work in terms of bringing new functionality and improved user experience in terms of interface stuff, but the theme has not really been touched in a long time. And so the out-of-the-box feel can feel a little bit dated, a lot dated. And I thought having a polished administrative theme available will help provide some future focus, future direction, and sort of counteract the maybe unspoken assumption that sometimes the conversations around Backdrop usually go back to it because Drupal 7 hasn't reached end of life yet. There's a lot of focus on its compatibility with upgrading from Drupal 7 to Backdrop and how smooth that is and so on. And so there's a lot of backwards looking still. And I think after Drupal, but I think that having a new theme available that looks, more future facing is part of the goal. And I think maybe it's not guaranteed, but maybe it would be considered for Backdrop Core in the future. I think that would be super cool to have it available out of the box. So then the question is, how did I do this, and how am I doing this? And primarily, it's been a mixture of three things: open theme functions and templates, so that Backdrop begins to provide elements in the form that Jin's style sheets expect them, or the reverse of that, adapting the style sheets to match what Backdrop is providing, and then rewriting hooks and functions to try to replicate or reinterpret what Jin is doing in Drupal in ways that work with Backdrop. So one point of focus here that I am showing for the first one in terms of overriding the theme functions so that the underlying markup that gets provided matches what the style sheets from Jin expect. Admin blocks are used throughout the administrative interface, and so it made sense to adapt the default administrative block theming to match what Jin is expecting. And if you can see my little cursor here, these blocks here are what are referred to as admin blocks. So they're used on a whole variety of different administrative pages. And just changing the theme function in one place fixed this in all of those places. So for those of you who are interested in the code, you can see, the function theme admin block can be overridden. And so all I had to do was rename it Jin admin block, change the code here to markup as the Jin style sheets expected, and then it automatically applied the Jin theme. So the other way around is to adapt the style sheets from Jin to match what Backdrop is providing, because there are places where it's just not as quick and simple to override a theme function. There are places where the IDs and classes that Drupal provides no longer match what Backdrop is providing out of the box. And so this example here, if you can see, on the top is the header of the table you get when you go to the administrative listing, and this is the Drupal table header. And then the code you can see under here has an ID and a bunch of different classes that you can grab onto. But if you look at this, is the Backdrop version, you can see there's only one class here, and the table probably has different classes on it that I was able to grab onto. So I had to just adjust the style sheets to match the CSS elements that I could grab in this case. In terms of reinterpreting hooks and functions, I mentioned earlier that the sidebar edit was implemented quite a bit differently. This may change. I think it's still listed experimental or beta in the Backdrop version because I'm playing around with it a little bit. I'm trying to get it working first of all, and open to conversation how it's implemented if people have opinions on that. But rather than rewriting the underlying forms array structure as Jin does for Drupal, at the moment I'm just simply rearranging the page visually on top of the form that exists. Feels like a little bit of a lighter way to do this, at least for the moment, in getting the functionality working and in place. So it means that the sidebar and action buttons don't exactly match the way it's done in Drupal, because I'm not actually rearranging, like taking buttons from here and moving them into the sidebar. So the buttons remain and the site remains, and largely unedited, just restyled. But one benefit is that it's been very easy to extend the sidebar edit to taxonomy terms and users, and also to provide, of course, for custom entities, which Jin for Drupal provides, and I've had to basically re-implement in a slightly different way to provide something similar for Backdrop. So this is creating a content item. You can see the sidebar edit panel there, which is essentially the vertical tabs that usually show up on the bottom in the backdrop set, show up in the sidebar. Action buttons and the sidebar toggle are up in that section, but likewise for adding taxonomy terms and user accounts, you get that sidebar edit experience as well. And then the Gin for Drupal provides this hook to allow you to register custom entities to use that sidebar edit panel. And what I've done in Backdrop is basically provided a way to register different paths to do the same thing. So it's not exactly the same, but it provides a very similar option. And if you're curious how you can test or look at what Gin for Backdrop looks like, I've got some basic instructions here, which I'll just demonstrate in a moment. You can go to backdropcms.org, click on Demo Backdrop, and then it'll allow you to spin up a demo site, use the project installer to install Gin, and explore, enjoy, and come and join me in the issue queue if you've got any issues or requests that you would like to see. So I'm just going to show you that really quickly as a demo, and then if anybody has questions or comments, the floor will be open at that point. On Backdrop CMS, we have the demo backdrop button here. When you click that, you go to this create a demo sandbox page, which I've done just minutes before this presentation started. And I create, so it gave me a new site, and there's a button there. You can visit your site, which looks like this. So this is that default out of the box look. And then under appearance, you can go to install new themes. Oh, should have refreshed this a moment before. And I've searched here for Gin, and you can just click add to installation, shows up here. Click install. It'll take the latest version. And then you simply have to enable it. And down at the bottom here, you can set the administration theme. So if I choose Gin there, then you can see the whole interface changes, and you can explore those here under Gin settings, appearance, and then Gin settings. So we could go to a light mode. We can change the accent color if we want to, the focus color, or we can increase the contrast if we want to do that. And you can play around with all these different settings. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and if there are any questions, you can take them. Otherwise, that's all I prepared to show you. And looks like Nora is not here anymore, but yes, dark mode.
I was going to ask, what are some potential use cases for Gin? Do you have like any examples?
Use cases for Gin?
On Backdrop.
It's primarily for administrators and content editors, and if a person doesn't have access to the backend, if we call it, then they typically wouldn't see it. I don't think it makes a lot, or I haven't seen what it would look like as a front end theme, but it's mainly intended for administrators, content editors, that type of user.
Gotcha. And thank you for the presentation. It was very
Yeah,
informative.
thank you all for coming.